All right, I have 6:30. Let's call this meeting to order. Jump down to 3. Do we have any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as submitted.
I second.
All in favor, aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay. Next, we go to public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to make a public comment? Okay. Let's look at our minutes from November 22nd. We have motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes as written.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor, aye.
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 Aye. I noticed Carolyn Bowers just joined. Carolyn, we already gave the opportunity for public comment, but you weren't on. Do you want to make any public comments?
And we do have a public hearing as part of item number 6 as well.
Okay, all right, well, we can wait on that. She's still connecting to audio, I think.
Catherine's here.
Looks like we have someone else coming in too. All right, we'll have a chance for public comment later on. We don't have any new business. So our old business is the land use code rewrite and our final draft presentation. And we have Austin here to make that presentation. I'm hoping that we have all our members of the BOT somewhere watching this. I don't know, doesn't sound like it, but we certainly need them to hear his presentation. Austin, we are ready to go on that. I will tell you that we've got some commissioners who've made additional comments. So are we able to submit some still if we want to?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go over that in just a minute, actually, about the final revision draft that will come up.
Okay. All right, I'll let you take it away. Thank you very much, Austin.
Thank you. Nate, are you able to scroll down and just kind of go through my slides, or would you prefer I share my screen?
Whatever you prefer, I can do it. I don't mind.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. Well, I'm happy to be back with all of you today. This is exciting. We are to the adoption hearings. This has been a super quick process, and I really appreciate all of your guys' hard work and really jumping into what is a really big undertaking and doing it in record-breaking time. So just wanted to first say thank you guys so much for working through this process and sticking with it. And we're finally almost there, hopefully. All things go well. So if you want to scroll down a bit, Nate, we'll look at the project timeline. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so as you can see, we moved through this really quickly. We've only got a couple final steps remaining. Of course, today is the Planning Commission's adoption hearing. So tonight, hopefully, we will get a recommendation in the form of a motion from the Planning Commission that will give direction to the Board of Trustees on whether or not to recommend this land use code rewrite. And with that recommendation can come any sort of conditions of that recommendation. So what I would consider a condition is something that's policy oriented that seeks to change the draft in front of you. Now, I have gotten a couple other comment submittals, as Lamar stated, from a couple of commissioners after this packet was posted. And so if they're really straightforward kind of correction typo things, I don't consider that policy. I'm just going to go ahead and make all of those changes. If it's more policy oriented, I'm going to flag those for you tonight. And I would love to hear a little bit more discussion on which way the planning commissioners would like to go with those issues. And if you decide to make a change on those big policy issues tonight, that's totally great. All you'll have to do is in your motion for recommendation, just state which way you want me to go on those. And then I will incorporate those revisions in this next draft. And that will be the draft that the Board of Trustees sees next week, a week from today, actually, for their adoption hearing. So in this timeline, we had 4 different drafts, which is quite a lot of feedback to get on this process, and we were able to really create a product that I think is going to work really well for the town, and that is tailored a whole lot to the town's needs. So if we want to go down and look at the new organization of the code, a lot of this stuff is going to be repetitive of my last presentation, and you guys are very familiar with how the new land use code is structured, and a lot of those changes you guys have gone through the drafts quite a lot at this point. So I will try to eliminate as much redundancies in that in my presentation as possible, and try to focus on some of the big issue areas, whether they be issue areas along the way that we've kind of come to a conclusion on already, or ones that I could use a little bit more feedback on. And there really aren't many of those remaining. Like I said, we had 4 drafts to go through these, and so I think we worked out a lot of the kinks, which is great. So in this process, we went from your former drafts being 110 pages down to 59 pages, which is actually a surprise to me. For those who are keeping track, that's actually less pages than the draft I submitted to you originally. So your guys' hard work resulted in more cutting and more simplification, which I think is great. And so we have a lot of simplification, we have a lot of consolidation, we moved a lot of redundancies. And then of course, I would repeat that we have this sort of spectrum of revisions. On one hand, we have some provisions that were just carried forward. Those are pretty rare. Most provisions would fall into one of the other 2 buckets, being that they got a lot of cleanup and sort of minor repair to them. And then in the 3rd bucket, completely new or completely replaced provisions. And if we want to go down a bit, thank you. Okay, so this is a new area I wanted to talk about because I got quite a few comments on it, so I just wanted to get out ahead and address this question. So we got quite a few comments on how does this land use code actually apply in practice. So I will attempt to answer that tonight, and if you have more questions, feel free to ask them. So this land use code does apply to all land in the town. There's no land that is exempt from the land use code. So all buildings and structures and uses, they're subject to this land use code. But everything that's currently in existence, all structures that are already built, that were built in conformance with a different land use code, they don't have any requirement to come into conformance with this code if the requirement changed on them. In other words, this isn't the case, but just to elucidate or illustrate the example, if we had changed the setbacks to be more restrictive, and that meant that some structures that were built previously were now no longer conforming, they wouldn't have to do anything differently with their structures to come into conformance. They could leave their structure as is, knowing that they were in conformance at one time with a previous land use code. So another example that might help on the flip side of things. Say you have a single family dwelling that was built in conformance with a previous land use code, and still is in conformance today, the single family dwelling aspect of the structure. But now they decide they want to use that structure as a short-term rental. Even though that structure was already in place and we didn't change anything with the permissions of that single family dwelling, that structure, their new use, that short-term rental, would have to come into conformance with this land use code. So hopefully that kind of illustrates how the applicability works, but I'm happy to talk about that more. The big picture is, if you were already built, if you were already in conformance with the previous land use code, you don't have any further requirements. If you're changing something, or if you're new, then you do have, potentially new requirements under this land use code. But in either case, all of the land in the town is subject to the land use code. Hopefully that makes some sense. And we can talk about that more later if you'd like. So moving on to the districts. So I won't spend a ton of time here because I think that it seemed like all the commissioners were sort of on board with this new approach with this lineup of districts. I didn't get a ton of questions in this space, with one exceptions where I got a ton of questions and a ton of comments, and that is this final district, the downtown village overlay district. Lots of different comments and questions on this, so I thought I'd try to address them head on once again. So Nate, actually, if you want to scroll down one more slide. So this is a new district, and it only applies upon a property owner requesting for it to be applied. It would only apply when a property owner submits a rezoning to be zoned into this overlay. So in other words, even though you would be approving this new district, if the land use code is adopted as shown with this district in it, then the district would exist on paper, but not in practice. It would sit dormant until some property owner said, you know, I really like the idea of that overlay. That works for my development or my property. I want to use it. And so that's how this functions. It doesn't apply until someone asks for it to apply. And why property owners might ask for it to apply is that you get some benefits. You get some benefits if this applies to your property or if you rezone into this district. One example is that you would get reduced parking if you rezone into this district. And the town gets a lot of benefits as well. Namely, they get the benefit of meeting one of their largest comprehensive plan goals, which was incentivizing certain types of design and development, pedestrian-oriented development specifically in the downtown area. So happy to talk about that more, but I thought I'd give it another stab to try to address kind of the functions of that district. Okay.
Could I ask you a question for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you talk about zoning, it just occurred to me, does this have to all be connected? Or can you be in that district and your house isn't downtown? That doesn't make a difference, does it?
So you would have to be in an area in the comprehensive plan that is listed as like I think it actually is called the downtown village area in the plan, but I could be wrong.
Just that area.
And that's correct. Yeah. So you couldn't go apply this in areas outside of the downtown village area. And that's listed in the applicability under that district section. So it would be part of your criteria in considering whether to apply this district. So
Okay.
if someone came forward in a really rural area of the community and asked for this, I'm not sure why they would, but if they did, you would have to deny that application because it wouldn't meet the criteria in the code.
Okay.
Good question.
That's all.
Yeah.
So Austin, while you're fielding questions on the overlay,
Yeah.
this is Rocco. I wanted it added that the applicant needs to apply for this overlay. That was one of my comments.
Mhm.
For the historic preservation overlay, it's explicit. It's covered in the code in the language on page 41, I think, Article 5, paragraph 6A3. But I don't see a similar wording for the downtown village overlay.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let me pull that section up really quickly, but I can't remember if I made any adjustments. I did see your comment.
So, yeah, for historic preservation, it says application submittal. Every owner of record shall consent to and sign the application for designation. But I didn't see anything equivalent for the downtown village.
So that's a great point. It would actually show up in the rezoning. Let me just double check here in Article 5.5A. No, okay. So I don't handle it differently than any other district right now. We definitely could. Historic preservation is a unique, is certainly a unique one, but so is this downtown village overlay. So if you wanted a separate line in there that basically said exactly what you said, but apply it to the downtown village overlay, that's certainly something we can do. It's true regardless of whether we say it. So any rezoning has to be brought forward by the owner of record. That's a state law requirement. What's unique about historic preservation and that it functions as an overlay similar to this district, but historic preservation has special rules applied to how it's rezoned. And that's why it's called a designation process rather than a rezoning, even though in process they do the same thing. But I agree, if it doesn't seem very clear right now, it's certainly an easy thing to clear up, and we can just add a line in the DBO section.
So I would like to push for that because commissioners come and go, but the code will stay. And so I would like it to be explicitly stated that the applicant needs to apply for the downtown village overlay.
Okay.
Up for discussion.
I would agree with you.
I think it was the intent of all the commissioners that that be the case.
Okay.
And that section you just read, Rocco, about the historic preservation. I just want to make sure I understand that nobody can come in and force you to put your property into that historic overlay or that historic district. You've got to do it yourself, right? Is that correct, Austin?
Yeah, it has to be consensual. So you don't necessarily have to be the one to bring the application, but if an application is brought and your property is included, then you must sign the application. So you must consent to being a part of that historic preservation district, but in practice, it's typically one property owner who really wants their whole neighborhood to be historically designated. That property owner goes door by door asking for signatures on the same application. And if they get all the signatures, then all of those properties would be eligible if it meets the criteria in the code.
And if one property owner declines, then that one's just carved out of the historic district.
Potentially, yeah. They would either be carved out or the district would only go in as so far as that property line, and all of the properties beyond would have to submit a separate application. So it's contiguous.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good questions. Any other questions on what I've covered so far?
This is Nate. I do have a question of the example you referenced on a slide or two before about the short-term rentals and the change of use, then necessitating conforming with new code. So I don't know if I'm just trying to think of a prop, but so are you saying if single family dwelling, all of a sudden the owner wants a short-term rental? I'm trying to think of a regulation, I guess, where this might be problematic. I was thinking initially of setbacks, but I don't think our setbacks are really changing. But
Nate, an example might be the amount of parking required.
yeah, but what if they're already non-conforming right now with the setbacks? And then now they want a short-term rental, does that mean they would have to apply for a variance in order to have a short-term rental?
No, because they're not expanding their nonconformity. So if they were currently non-conforming, as long as they're not saying, hey, we want to push the setback even closer to the property line, then they wouldn't have to come in for a variance or something of that nature. They would just have to meet the thresholds of the use change. But I think the example Lamar brought up is a good one. So if you require additional parking for short-term rentals and say that that single family dwelling just can't provide that parking, then they're essentially not allowed to have a short-term rental in that area. So even though they're a completely conforming legal single family dwelling today, if they wanted to try to convert into a short-term rental use, if they couldn't meet the standards of the short-term rental requirements, then they couldn't do that conversion.
Okay,
Does that kind of make sense?
I think that helps.
Okay. Cool. Well, if you think of other questions, we can come back to it. Okay. I only have a couple more slides, so maybe I'll just kind of churn through and then we'll talk about everything. So I do have a couple of questions here on the uses section. So again, this is another area you guys are really familiar with. You guys spent a lot of time working through this chapter. And I think from the very beginning, this was an area that the commission had thought about a lot and had given me very detailed notes to start with. And then it was a matter of refining. With that being said, I do have a couple of questions based off comments received I would love feedback on tonight. So one of them is in relation to this wind energy conversion system use. So that's a fancy name for a wind turbine, which is a form of alternative energy. So there were some questions on whether the town should really even be considering this use. It's very unlikely that you would get a wind turbine in the town. So is there really a benefit to having it in the regulations? Totally up to you. How it would work today is that it allows both small and large scale, but with a lot of different standards. And so you have to meet really extensive setbacks. So it basically has to be set right in the middle of your property. It can't be at the edges of your property if you do place a wind turbine on your property, but it does allow for smaller wind turbines, that now with conventional technology, with wind turbines, some of them are literally 3 feet. And so people put them like on the rooftops. And so it would allow for those kinds of uses, less commercial type uses. And that's sort of what I was thinking when I was drafting this section, is that it's very, very unlikely that the town would ever get a commercial turbine, but maybe you get a residential property owner who wants this accessory use in a really small capacity. And this would allow them to do so, but still have some standards. So I would love your feedback on that use, to keep it, to not keep it, more standards, less standards, what have you. Right now it's allowed as an accessory use in the R1, R2, and MX1 districts. And the other area where we got a couple questions was short-term rentals. So just to cover it again, I tried to forecast this earlier just to set up this conversation. And the answer is, the question was whether and how the town is able to regulate short-term rentals. How far can the town go in regulating short-term rentals? They look a whole lot like just single-family uses. How are we able to put additional regulations on these types of uses? It's an excellent question, and a question that's actually getting a ton of legal attention, but not yet in Colorado. So the answer in Colorado is that you may regulate them however you like today. In other jurisdictions, that's changing, but it has not changed in Colorado yet. With that being said, I think your short-term rental regulations are pretty middle of the road. I don't think they're super onerous. I think they are like a pretty fair way to go about the use. So even if the law changed in Colorado and courts decided that they didn't want municipalities regulating these much tighter than the use to which they're accompanied with, like a single family dwelling, I think your regulations would still be totally fine under whatever new standard would be created. But again, today that standard doesn't exist in Colorado. In Colorado, municipalities have carte blanche to regulate short-term rentals however they like. So I got a couple questions on that, and it seemed like maybe a little nervousness about how to regulate short-term rentals, but I would just say rest assured that it's completely legally sound. You're absolutely able to do this in Colorado today. But another area I would like some feedback from you guys. So those 2 uses I would love some feedback on tonight. And then if we just want to roll through the last slide actually, and then we can kind of just take all the questions and comments. So I won't go over much here because we've also spent a ton of time here, and there actually wasn't a ton of changes through all of the comments received. This area or this chapter had a lot less comments than some of the other areas. One of the areas that did change quite a lot was the historic preservation procedures. So I would just say to keep an eye out for those changes. Those are based off commissioner recommendations. So I just wanted to flag that's an area that did kind of change a lot. It's sort of the one exception to that rule, that most of this didn't really change from my last presentation besides the historic preservation procedures. Okay, I think that's enough talking for me for now. Or I'll just keep going on.
This is Rocco, and feedback on this current slide, the table 5.1, I think is showing the old table with the planning director.
Oh, you're right. I should have changed that. It is changed in your draft, but I did not change the thumbnail. Thank you for that, Rocco.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be important for the presentation next week.
Yep, I will change that for the presentation next week.
Oh, this is my, I personally don't think we'd ought to allow the big wind generators, period. And I'm hoping that, I haven't read the recent draft because I was out of town for the last couple of weeks. But I'm hoping that the town has a chance to say no before anyone even puts a small one up. Is that the way they're structured?
So right now, no. Right now, if you met certain requirements in the code that are pretty strict, like I said, the setback requirement, for example, you have to place it right in the middle of your property, essentially. If you met all of those requirements, then it would be a check the box approval. It'd be administrative. So it wouldn't be through any sort of public process. Again,
In
wanting.
the middle of a small lot, that's pretty close to a neighbor. I mean, we have some pretty small lots in town.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
I said,
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry, my mic wasn't on. I say even in the middle of a lot, we have some pretty small lots in this town. And it could be pretty objectionable to the neighbors, even on a small lot, if it were in the, or if it were in a small lot in the center of the lot even. So I really think the town ought to have a say, period. I don't know whether the rest of the planning commission agrees, but that's my feeling on it.
Is
What does
there,
everybody else think?
I have a question that
And-
real quick. This is Nate. Is there some sort of size limit to them for the administrative approval? And I think that we're talking about the small kind of horizontally axis ones instead of the vertical axis ones. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I'm following the horizontal vertical.
Like
Distinction.
it wouldn't be like a fan like that has a vertical axis like the giant wind farm ones. It would be more of a horizontal axis where it's sitting kind of like a cup almost, where it's spinning facing upwards, I guess is what I would describe it.
More
Right,
like
Those are-
a
those are
ceiling fan,
Pretty small.
like
right.
a ceiling,
Or can be.
ceiling fan.
How would the wind even move something like that? The wind doesn't flow up and down.
Well, it's
The way the,
Yeah,
Then-
okay, so my background is engineering,
Good.
and yes, it can be done. They actually do have vertically aligned wind generators. And they don't have a large diameter, but they're a little taller. But yeah, you can generate electricity just through one of those as well. It doesn't have to be, a miniature of the
Mhm.
big ones that you see out in the fields. It can actually be vertically aligned too.
And how much noise do they make?
I don't know. It would depend upon the actual design of, the fins that actually catch the wind.
Yeah.
A lot of them are curved designs, to help with the efficiency.
Well, that's why I think the town ought to have a say regardless of the style. Because, if it's totally silent and it's not gonna interrupt anybody nearby, we could say, yeah, go ahead. But if it's noisy and the neighbors are gonna object, we could say, no, you gotta get a different design.
Yeah, I would look to the commission on that.
And Austin, that would reference this, we have a noise, already have noise limits in the other part of our code that I assume that would reference somehow.
yeah, that's exactly right. So all of those nuisance controls apply to all land in the town as well. So if the decibel limits are higher than what's allowed under the nuisance at the property line, then it wouldn't be allowed. But again, based off how the regulations are written, one could not do wind turbines under how it's written today. It has to be accessory to a permitted use. So it has to be smaller scale, and it has to be positioned on the property to be pretty far away from any neighboring property. So I doubt that you would get in trouble noise wise with the neighbors, just based off how far you have to set it back from the property line, which again would be outcome determinative in cases involving small lots. Small lots just wouldn't really be eligible for this use because you have to set it back depending on the height. I think I have it at like 1.5 times the height or something like that. So it's really got to be positioned towards the middle of the lot based off the height. There's also height limitations on it as well. But yeah, I mean, I would love to hear your feedback. These are all great points and definitely worthy considerations. And I'm happy to make whichever change you guys would like. If you want like a higher level of approval or tweaking some of those requirements, whatever the commission's
Austin.
most comfortable with.
Austin, what would be the downside of having a higher level of approval, as Mike is suggesting? Because I think it's hard for us to just picture all the possibilities, and we sort of don't want to leave it wide open. What's the downside of doing that?
I don't think there's a huge downside. I think it's from a private property perspective. Of course, people want all of the rights possible on their property without going to see anyone. And so I think that's the only downside I can think of, is that, property owners have to go through one additional hurdle. But I mean, I don't see that as being a huge negative, honestly.
Do we have other comments on this, commissioners?
This is Lisa. I think they should be conditional also.
Okay.
I think as our efforts to preserve the environment advance, I think it's going to be more common to see other ways to, get energy to our homes. And I think, there may be some that are reasonable. And so anyway, I think conditional all the way across for R1, R2 mixed and all that, I think it would be a good idea.
Any disagree
I would
with
agree.
this? We've got to, you agree, Rocco? Okay.
I don't care.
Yeah, I don't either. If that makes sense. That's fine.
You had 2 strong feelings and 2 I don't cares. How are you voting, Chairman?
I like to be conservative, and when I can't think of all of the problems ahead of time, I like the idea that we can approve it. So that would be, those would be my thoughts.
So
And then Austin, you want us to comment about short-term rentals? That's your other concern?
Yeah, I did get quite a few comments on that area. So if what I said makes total sense, everyone's comfortable with it, then we can just move on, no worries. But if there's any feedback you guys would like to give on that subject, happy to hear it today.
one thing I'd like to, while you're talking about the review procedures, I noticed there was something about the minor site plan. The planning commission is the appellate, and it ends there. They can't go beyond that to appeal. And also, if you're denied a minor site plan, you can't ask for a variance. Am I reading that wrong? It was kind of odd to me.
So not the variance element. You would be still eligible for a variance, even if you got denied a minor site plan. But you are correct in that the planning commission would have the final say. They would be the final appellate body for a minor site plan as currently drafted.
Well, somewhere it said that if you were denied that, you couldn't ask for a variance. Am I
think
wrong? That was the
That's-
final thing. But then the other thing, let's see. The temporary use, again, the planning commission is the final appeal. They can't go further than that to the trustees or anybody. I guess they could go to court.
Yep, so that is how it would work. Anytime that a petitioner has exhausted their remedies under their local land use codes, then the
Mhm.
option would be to go to district court in the jurisdiction to which you're located. So you can add different layers of appeals. I in practice haven't found them super helpful, and often I think they're more time consuming. So if you added another layer of appeal, so that you don't like the planning commission's decision on appeal, so the planning commission is already hearing an issue on appeal, and the planning commission issues a final decision, so they deny the appeal. And then the
Yeah.
property owner goes up to the board of trustees. In most cases, if you allow them to go up to the board of trustees, they're going to get the same answer. And now they've spent another 2 months getting that same answer. And so my experience on both ends, it's more efficient to have just one body giving that final appellate answer. But totally can do it a different way. You can totally have 2 appeal bodies, so that if you don't like the answer with the first, you can go to the second. But my take is that it often doesn't lead to different outcomes and comes at additional cost and time.
Right. Well, while we're on that thing, I'd just like to make my pitch again that I think we still need a board of adjustment. I don't think that the planning commission should have total power on a lot of things. I mean, just just to me, a Board of Adjustment sits in state law. And it's sort of like a court of equity. And if you could have it a quick appeal, it's more citizen involvement. That's the only thing I'm kind of looking at too. Okay. I know we're trying to make it simple and quick, but we don't want to overlook what people want to.
So Ann, I think you bring up a good point about the Board of Adjustment. I don't think they have the ultimate power. They're just the appellate authority.
Right.
But it does, how it's written for the definitions, that the Planning Commission acts as Board of Adjustment is contrary to how it's set up in the rest of the code. And so there needs to be discussion on that before this moves forward.
We definitely need to make that consistent. What is your suggestion, Austin?
So in other provisions of the code, it refers to the Board of Adjustment, correct, as the appellate body? Is that correct?
That's correct, but since it was established in 2020, it hasn't been staffed. There has been no Board of Adjustment.
Right.
Hasn't been populated.
And I don't know why. I'll just be honest with you. When I changed my voting status so I could be in the government here, I vote in Green Mountain Falls. I thought, well, I'll apply for the Board of Adjustment, but I was talked out of it. They said, why don't you volunteer for the Fire Mitigation Committee? Well, I did that. And then after a year, I was able to apply for the Planning Commission, and I did that. But it's just all these, I don't know what I mean. I don't know what I'm saying really, except that there's a reason for that Board of Adjustment if it's in state law. I just don't.
Austin, assuming that we do not have citizens who, beyond Ann, who are interested in applying for that or serving on that, what are your suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great point. And so when I work in other small rural areas, they typically do not have both a planning commission and Board of Adjustment for the reasons that you just stated. It's really hard to fully staff both. It's really hard to get two separate groups to staff both, and confidently so, honestly. And so I think most municipalities I've worked on have said that even though there are also requirements in state law for a planning commission, that's mentioned a whole lot throughout state law, just like a Board of Adjustment, folks have decided that it'd be a lot simpler if we had the same acting body, the same group of people doing both of these decisions. And so it's much more common now in smaller communities, especially, that the same folks are fulfilling both of those duties. And you can do so as simply as just defining, as we have in this land use code, that the Planning Commission will act as the Board of Adjustment, that they will fulfill those duties. And then you just tailor your procedures based off that. And so the Planning Commission hears certain appeals, just like a Board of Adjustment would, but so does your Board of Trustees, just like it would if you did or didn't have a Board of Adjustment. And so it is this particular body that's set out in state law, just like a planning commission. But the duties aren't really unique other than it's just an appellate body. And so many rural communities especially have decided that we will house our appellate bodies in different structures and different already existing bodies like planning commission and Board of Trustees. So that is the more, I would say, common method now with smaller communities. And it, is a lot less demanding for the citizenry.
It would be for the staff, it'd be easier, wouldn't it? I do notice they have one in Woodland Park. It rarely meets. It's very unusual. It's usually really.
Commissioners, we are getting way, way, way off track, and we're using
Sorry.
time that we don't have. I want to finish this topic up with addressing Rocco's comment. Is there an inconsistency, or is there not an inconsistency that needs to be addressed in the code?
So if the Board of Adjustment has other authority and other code provisions, then it would defer back to this definition, which says the planning commission acts as the board of adjustment. It would be a lot cleaner if we go through each of those references and replace board of adjustment with planning commission. So that's something that we can do as part of a cleanup ordinance, if that's something you'd like to do.
You have to repeal the,
That makes sense. That makes sense. This discussion started with Austin's request that we discuss what he went over with us with short-term rentals, and we got way off topic. So let's go back to what he asked us to talk about, which is short-term rentals. Lisa, did you have a comment or question?
I do not, thank you.
Monica?
that was already passed.
I have no comments.
I don't.
No comment.
Good, Austin. We appreciate your clarification because we had been told at one point in time that you had to treat short-term rentals exactly the same as single-family homes, and to learn that we can treat them differently is extremely helpful.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So I think that's all the questions I have. I'll obviously stick around for the entire hearing and listen to public comment and all that and hear from you guys throughout. But if so happy to take any other questions or comments, but that's all I had from my end.
Austin, do you want to run through what the two commissioners have said to you and their comments and questions? Are there anything there that you feel like we need to discuss or get clearer on?
I think they were mostly, very straightforward things that I can just go ahead and make. They weren't policy changes. There was one comment. It wasn't a suggestion. It was just a comment saying that the R1 lot line or R1 lot minimums seem to be a little low. But that's all the comment said. I don't know if they were advocating for anything other than just maybe commenting on it. I'm not sure. It might be worth discussing though.
This is Ann. I had a question on my page 34.
And let's
And before you
Ann.
do that, can I comment on?
Oh,
Because I
sure,
made that
sorry.
comment to Austin. So
Yeah, we need to
Austin,
stay on topic, please.
Austin, so I was the one, page 15, Article 4, Table 4.1, the minimum lot divisions for an R2 and an MX1, they
Oh,
did seem
R2.
really small. We hadn't really discussed those. And I think it was
Oh.
like 2,000 feet. Let me see. I am traveling out of town and I brought an old, let's see,
So-
I have an old copy, but
So R2 is 4,000 square feet
Yeah.
minimum, and then MX1 is 1,500 square feet.
1,500, yeah, it's tiny for
Yeah,
a
very
mixed
small.
use. I just thought for minimum that they should be a little larger, especially if you're going to have more than, one, so an R2 is more than one residence, right? I mean, so am I right on that? Gosh, I don't have the
So
right.
they definitely are smaller. And so
I
my take, again, it's totally up to the commission. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback tonight on this. My take is that with a lot area, I typically like to go smaller because it's not something you can easily change. And so I don't like to create non-conformings. If your lot already is in existence, it's really small, then I don't like to forbid you from
Okay.
developing on it, period, just because you have a small lot. And instead, I let my setbacks do the work. And so I let those other development standards do the work of what do I want the form of the building to look like. But I try not to go so far as to say you have a small historical lot, therefore you can't do anything with it. And so that's my take on it, but would love to hear your guys' feedback.
Well,
as
I wouldn't say anything, but you can't do a mixed use, or you can't do an R2, you could do an R1. I don't know. And then our R1, let me see,
So R1's a bit higher.
it's a bit
R1
higher.
Right, so
Yeah.
the lowest would be, so basically if you have a really small lot, your option would to be rezoned into MX1 where you could build something on it. But in those
Okay.
other districts, you really wouldn't be able to.
Okay, I'm all right with that then. I just needed to understand that better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
good question.
And then can I just piggyback above there in the R1?
Yeah.
It's back in the uses on 3. Shouldn't we allow people to be able to charge their electric vehicles at their home?
You're absolutely right. And I did change that. That was a great catch.
Oh, okay, fine. All right, all right. So you changed that and then there was some typo. You probably got my other comments.
Yeah, I think
okay.
the only one I didn't change was the lot area one, because I wasn't
Okay.
sure where to go with that one.
Okay, And then the curb cutting thing where you had to go higher or lower. Okay. All right, gotcha. All right, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate the thoughtful comments. And while we were looking, I did find the section you were referencing, and it's the minor modification process. So if
Uh-huh.
you're denied a variance, you can't then go say, I want a minor modification instead.
Oh, it
And
was the
so-
opposite. Uh-huh.
So the reason for that is because they're very similar procedures. And if you can't get the higher level one, then you automatically won't be eligible for the lower level one. So it's just stating sort of the obvious. If you fail on the bigger level approval, you will by in fact fail on the lower level approval. So just like, please don't bring it
So-
to us.
So if you start with the minor one, thinking that you just need minor, and you don't get that, you could ask for a variance.
That's
I
correct.
guess I read it backwards or something. I must.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so Ann, did you have another question?
Well, I did it was on page 34,
Mhm.
expiration of approvals. And it said, the decision-making body can extend that. Well, who's is that the staff?
It would be the underlining, so whoever approved the application, whoever has the authority to approve it
And
would be the
maybe they'd
decision-making
approved
body.
something and they needed an extension.
They would have to go back to that body to which gave them the approval. So if it was planning commission, then they would have to go back to planning commission because they would be the ones familiar with the application. And planning commission would go like, oh yeah, okay, I remember this application. So why did you not build in this time? Why did you let your
Yeah.
application expire? And then planning commission would be able to decide whether or not meets the criteria for an extension.
Is the staff ever considered the decision-making body too?
They are.
They can extend. Yeah,
Yeah, you'll find that in your charts, Pam. So let's understand, Austin. You're saying you're going to make some changes. We haven't seen them. We'll see those on the 9th or by the 9th. But we're going to have a public hearing here in a few seconds. And then we'll need a resolution. And are we able to approve the land use code as we understand verbally that you've told us that you'll be making the changes that were submitted and that we have discussed? What happens if we get this on the 9th and I have a commissioner who says, hey, he misunderstood this. This isn't what I intended. And, I don't think that's going to happen because you seem
see it again.
and don't have questions. But
Sure, no,
if something like that happened, what would we do?
That's a great question. So how I would prefer you guys to make your decision tonight is to say, for example, we would like to approve the land use code as written with the minor corrections submitted by the planning commissioners and the following policy changes. One of them will be that the wind energy conversion system use gets moved to a conditional use. Another will be that clarifying language on the applicability of the downtown village overlay district be added. I would consider those two policy decisions that we made today. The rest I would consider, like the rest of Lisa's comments, I think were just oversights, typos, that I would like the authority to just kind of knock off really quickly and you guys not have to list them in your motion.
And did
So-
you saw Rocco's comments as well?
I did.
Okay, good.
I just thought of something too, Austin, just a question. It's in the definitions sort of thing for
Sure.
the adult entertainment and all that stuff. And
Mhm.
you mentioned things like hookah bars and things like that, do we need all that verbiage of all those things?
So short answer is no, but if you don't include it, you incur legal liability. So this is an issue that I talked to Lamar and Becky about because there's some First Amendment constraints. So in a very early meeting, we talked about how to approach this issue because it carries some legal risk. And we decided to go with the least legal risky option, which is to say that all of these uses are allowed in at least one district, but you get to to be able to have that use, to be able to have that adult entertainment use, you have to meet very onerous standards. So what the Supreme Court has said is that these types of businesses are a form of First Amendment protected speech, meaning that their business is speaking by expressing itself by advertising or just being that type of business, that they are invoking their First Amendment right of expression and speech. You cannot prohibit it. But what you can do is put restrictions on the impact, and they haven't clarified what that means. And so what we did was allow the use, all those different types of uses, all those different kinds of speeches, but we have regulated it extremely stringently in such a way that it would probably be practically impossible for it ever to be allowed in the town.
Okay.
So it's a
All
tricky
right.
First Amendment issue.
All right, thank you, Austin.
Hey, Lamar, before we move on, I did have comments about Article 5, Paragraph 2, talking about planning department, director, things like that. Austin, when you said my comments would be included in the minor changes, does that incorporate that Article 5, Paragraph 2 wording?
Just trying to get there. Can you give me a little hint of what it says?
So Article 5, Paragraph 2, subsection B2(1) references a planning department. It's also referenced in Article 5, Paragraph 2C,
Oh, right.
numeral I.
Yep.
And then there's a couple of spots where the director is referenced.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Have those been changed for consistency?
They have. Thank you for bringing those up again.
thank you.
So it's in my draft. That's why I had trouble seeing it, because I've already made your guys' changes, but you guys don't see it in your packet draft.
Okay.
So yes, short answer.
That answers, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I have a question on the table. Let's see this slide here. The review procedures, this conditional use line, is that correct?
Let's take a look, because I should have updated that table and I did not. So which one are you looking at, the conditional use permit?
Yeah, it seems like there's two R's there instead of like the line above is.
Right, so that is correct, actually. So
Okay.
first, staff would review and give a recommendation to Planning Commission. And then Planning Commission would review and recommend at a public hearing to the Board of Trustees, and Planning Commission would take into consideration the staff recommendation. So it's a
Okay.
lot of different approvals there. We can certainly look at simplifying that, but because conditional uses are typically trickier issues, like the wind energy conservation or conversion systems that we were talking about earlier, those extra levels of approval can sometimes be helpful in formulating a better decision, but can totally make that more expedient if you'd like.
And in that case, the appeal would go back to the Planning Commission as the Board of Adjustment.
Yep, that's correct.
Oh, that's the way it works. I was wondering if you just stopped and then reconvened as the, you have to go up to the trustees and then come back to the same people.
Right.
Oh, and that's.
In those, that would be a rare case, but yeah, in that case. Again, something like a conditional use permit is typically the hardest approval to get in a land use code. And so we can certainly look at making it easier, but it's not unusual to have a lot of different boxes to check for those.
Okay, do we have any more questions or comments before we go into our public hearing from the commissioners?
Will we have a chance for more discussion during the hearing, Lamar?
You can discuss all you want right now as well as the public hearing, but do you have more, Rocco?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the stance on the Board of Adjustment and what the overall feel is among the town with Planning Commission acting as the Board of Adjustment.
Well, after listening to Austin and hearing that this is a pretty typical way to handle it, and with our goal of simplification, it sounds consistent with simplification and with reality. We don't have a lot of people lining up to sign up for Board of Adjustments. So given the example of other towns and the simplicity concept, Austin's made a great case for doing it this way. You have
Right,
a
no, I
No.
don't disagree. That's a good summation. I would just say that it may have ripple effects with other parts of the code that may need to be updated to be consistent with what we're recommending.
Mhm.
And we
I
can
can
add those, the staff
repeal.
and the mayor, we kind of have an ongoing list of cleanup items for code, so we can certainly review that and
You'll
add
have
that.
to repeal that ordinance that created it.
Well, I think it would just make it equal to the planning commission or
Oh,
something to that effect,
oh,
So,
I see.
or
so
reference.
Lamar, that satisfies my question about the Board of Adjustment. Thank you.
Sure. Do you have any others?
No.
Okay. Well, I would like to call our public hearing portion of our meeting to order. We have a few people on Zoom, and I don't know if anyone's come in person, but do we have any public comment or questions about this?
We have, I haven't received any formal requests, but we can just kind of, we have Mayor Dixon would like to comment, and so we could start with him.
Okay, do you need to? You're officially
Did
in
you-
public hearing?
Yeah, I can't.
Yes,
Did you say
Yes.
that? Okay.
Okay,
I did.
okay. First off, yeah, don't use the gavel on your head, please. First off, Planning Commission, excellent work. Very happy with what you and Austin have put together. I do have a couple comments / questions. When I looked it over, page 6 of the code, IV parentheses 2, you have a limitation on not using basically faux stone or faux brick downtown, it looks like to me. And I'm kind of curious if that was on purpose or if that's something that could be considered. And then the next one, and these, I only had 2 comments. On table 4.2, the minimum parking for the bed and breakfast doesn't appear to match the hotel, motel, or STR. Hotel, motel, and STR seems to have 1 parking for 2 bedrooms, and bed and breakfast says 1 parking per bedroom. And I was curious again if that was on purpose or if that's something that might be open for reconsideration.
Well, that would be a discussion with the commission. Austin, do you have comments on what people typically do or why those might be different? And
So,
Lisa,
yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to comment on those, and thank you for your comments. So on the first issue, that was the downtown village overlay discussion. And so those standards would only apply if you ask them to apply. And so it does carry certain design requirements. And again, those are coming from the goals in the comprehensive plan. But again, it would only apply if a property owner asked it to. So it doesn't apply anywhere right now, including in any properties downtown. But if a property owner asked for it to apply to their property because they wanted to get some of the benefits of that overlay district, then yeah, they would have to use certain types of materials and have to meet certain design check marks that try to get at a more pedestrian oriented and very high quality design. So that's the first question. On the second one, I think it's a good point. I'm definitely open to changing that parking minimum based off the Planning Commission feedback.
do we have feedback from the commissioner?
What was that?
On
Can you
that.
repeat that?
What we're asking about is the number of parking places that we're.
It's
considering
table
for-
4.2, at least what I saw. And it's for bed and breakfast.
For short-term rentals.
Oh,
Yeah,
here.
bed and breakfast, it says 1 per each guest room, and then short-term rentals and hotels, it looked like it said 1 per 2.
Hotel or, oh, I see.
One per two
Hotel,
guest rooms.
1 per 2 guest rooms,
Yeah,
1 per each here.
yeah. And then short-term rentals, I think, was 1 per 2 as well.
Well, and short-term rentals in that ordinance, we didn't, I don't think we specified a number. It
No,
was
not in
just
the
basically
ordinance.
your
We
parking
were-
plan has to match your,
Yeah, it refers back to here,
oh, okay.
is what it does. Yeah.
The short-term rentals is 1 per every 2 bedrooms, which is also consistent with the hotel motel. It looks like to be consistent, we just need to change the bed and breakfast.
Right.
I agree, Lisa, I agree.
I would agree.
Cool. So if we can also add that as a third to the motion tonight. Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks for your explanation on the first one. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay, so.
What was your
anything
first,
else?
first comment, Mayor?
Well, the first comment in the downtown
Oh,
overlay.
yeah, I remember.
It basically kind of prohibits imitation stone or imitation brick. And
Yeah, I thought that was way too much prescriptive detail. I don't know why we're getting into all that, frankly.
Yeah.
Well, the reason we're getting into it, as Austin just said, is because it follows the comprehensive plan. However, as a property owner, you volunteer for that.
mhm.
Forces you, nobody makes you. It's only if you decide, hey, this is what something I want to do with my property. And we want to have it in there because it's prescribed by the comprehensive plan. That's the reason for having it in there.
Yeah, and that satisfied my question.
Okay.
I was kind of curious what it was based on.
Yeah, nobody makes anybody do it at all.
Okay, fine.
What other public comment do we have? We have Nick, on, we have Carolyn Bowers, do we have, looks like Nick wants to comment.
Yes, thank you, Lamar. Nick Donzello. Question about the use of residential turbines. For instance, I live in the shade most of the year here, and like many other Green Mountain Falls folks, will the location of these turbines, like for instance, I want to put perhaps 2 on either side of my house on the roof line, is that going to be an issue? I mean, we can't really utilize a lot of solar here in this town if we're on the wrong side of the mountain. Is that going to be an issue with the new code?
Austin, you want to take that?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I think the short answer is that we wouldn't know until we had an application before us. There are, I'm just going down to the section, I think 4 use specific standards you would have to meet right now if the commission approves the draft as currently written. But and if you met those 4 conditions, then you would be eligible for that use. And I don't hear anything that you particularly stated as being a red flag. But with that being said, it sounds like that might be an issue that gets adjusted a little bit in this next revisions and might require a higher level of approval. But based off what you've told me today, not seeing an application before me, I don't think that there's anything that I would consider a red flag that would make you ineligible for that type of use.
All right, so just to clarify, all solar turbine usage is going to have to, there's an application process.
So
Approved.
only, or sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're good. Go on.
So this is actually one of the issues we're discussing tonight. As currently drafted in the draft before the Planning Commission, it would be a check the box approval. So you wouldn't have to submit an application. You'd go to staff, you'd say, I want this use. They'd say, do you meet these standards? You'd show them if you meet them or not. If you did, then you get approved. But as we discussed tonight, that might be changing for the turbine use, where you would actually have to bring an application forward, and it would be a part of a public hearing process with the Planning Commission. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, personally, I disagree with that, but it makes sense. So for solar, this is not something that is required or necessary. It's just only going to be for those that want to utilize turbines.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to let some of the commissioners speak on this issue, but the issue was raised tonight in the question of turbines and not solar. So the solar collector use would not, or we haven't discussed modifying that use on the proposed draft, which would allow it by right if you check certain boxes. So I don't think we've discussed changing that. It sounds like everyone's kind of on board with that. It's just the wind turbine use that sounds like might get modified from the draft in front of us tonight.
Okay. Now I heard earlier some concerns with noise. A turbine 2 to 3 feet in diameter that's operating optimally, they don't make any noise. So, because they're not like the giant ones we see commercially that are out in like Kansas.
Right.
So that's something that the commission may consider visiting in this code rewrite and possibly being a little more lenient on, because there are a considerable amount of residents that are in this town that just solar they just can't utilize it. So.
We had a couple of commissioners with concerns about this, and it may be partially, our own ignorance of how these are made and how they work. I think we were trying to be conservative about what if, and at least we would be able, if there was an approval process, we would have a chance to ask those questions. How loud is this? How many birds does this kill? All those kinds of questions from our own ignorance of not knowing that, or not knowing the various options. And maybe there's one out there that would fit all the criteria, but it does kill a bunch of birds and is horribly loud. So, that was our thought process, Nick. Commissioners, I'm happy for any of y'all to jump in, especially if you changed your mind based on what Nick said, or we can discuss it.
So before we move, I guess, to any more comments, whether this is a conditional use or an accessory use for the wind turbines, there's still that setback requirement, which is 1.1 times the total height. So if you're putting something 20 feet tall, it has to be 22 feet into your property. And I don't disagree with that, because if the thing comes toppling down, you don't want it to affect neighbors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I
that would include the total height of the house and everything, right? If it was mounted on a structure.
So I guess my only concern with that is that, these properties aren't very, very large. A house could be at the peak, 20, in excess of 20 feet. And we have houses right on top of each other. Again, the turbines, if mounted on a rooftop, being 2 to 3 feet in diameter, that would be a problem then for houses that live again like in the shade and in the shadows of this ridge behind us. So I get the concern of something toppling over. Of course, if professionally done, it's going to be inspected, I'm sure. I'm imagining, right? Is that correct?
You would hope so.
And
Is there a requirement for it to be inspected, Austin?
does solar get inspected? Yeah, I guess that's the question too. Yeah, so we're not talking like anything that's exceeding anything of a roof line. I think that's probably the only place that in many people's yards it could ever possibly go. And of course there is a difference between the commercial turbines that we see out in Colorado and in Kansas and significantly smaller. I know I heard Todd bring up before the vertical turbines, for instance. Certainly that's less impactful on birds, right? You're not going to have a bird flying into that as you would like with something with a prop. So maybe that's going to be a tough thing for you guys to, because there isn't a whole lot of knowledge, right? I mean, everybody's tracking solar, their panels, they're on roofs, simple enough. There's a couple different designs for turbines, and again, given the need these days for lowering energy costs. How do we not? How are we fair to those that don't have any sun but plenty of wind? The middle way was pretty good with Todd's suggestion, obviously with the vertical solution there with the turbines, but that's something that you guys may have to, consider if you don't have much knowledge as to that type of technology.
Well, and we also know the technology is going to evolve as well. So I think that's part of the reason we sort of wanted to have eyes on it. Maybe before we approved it, I saw Austin shaking his head about, no, there's no requirement for it to be inspected. Is that correct, Austin?
There's no zoning requirement. So if it's attached to a building, you probably have a building code requirement. And so that's when solar typically gets inspected, is through your building permits, through your building code, not through zoning. And so same here, it wouldn't be the actual inspection, like, does this work properly? Can your house take the load of this weight and what have you? That's a building code question, not a land use code question. So it wouldn't be addressed in what we're discussing tonight. And then the second point I would make is that the way the use is drafted now in this code is that it would allow for all those different types of technology. It allows for ground or building mounted. You could put it on your roof, you could put it on the ground, but yeah, there are definitely some standards that come along with that. And most of those standards relate to the placement and how close it is to the property line. And really what the standards are trying to get at is trying to push the use as close into the center of the property as possible. So I don't know if that answers any of your questions or helps at all.
It does. It definitely clarifies, again, we're talking about setbacks. Now, again, given the fact that people's properties are pretty sandwiched closely together here. I mean, my neighbor's structure on one side of my house is less than 20 feet away. So something on my roof that exceeds 20 feet, to the peak of the roof line, how would that, basically what I'm asking, could this be a case by case, or is it set in stone because of how these houses are built so closely together and on some of these?
I think my concern was that it needs to be a case by case so we can look at the situation, because we have so many different size lots and shaped lots and size buildings that I don't know how we would predefine the requirements other than to just take a look at them and not knowing, number one, what even options are out there for solar, but number two, what might be created in the future. I just think we'd like to take a look and see that it makes sense for the town and for the neighbors and for the size of the lot and the height of the house and all those things. I mean, the setback is 15 feet from the street and 10 feet from the side. So it can be pretty close to a neighbor.
Yeah, right. So our lot from one side to the other at its widest is maybe 50 feet.
Yeah.
So that's where we run into the issue of 22 feet, from these setbacks with something like that. It would make it pretty difficult.
Well, and I think you're making the argument, Nick, for the way that we've decided to do it tonight, which is
Case by case.
Yeah, case by case.
Yeah.
And you could go in with the staff and they would turn you down, and then you'd have to come and do an appeal. Whereas it might make sense just to start with planning commission, have a variance for this, bring an engineer, he says it's all going to work, here's why, blah, blah, blah. And just give us the information, because we do have so many unique situations, and it's just hard for us to write a code that's fit everything. So
Maybe you could take
what I'm
out all
thinking-
that detail like you did on the, so many other things, instead of writing it all out like Mike suggested. It is a case by case thing, as long as it's permitted. That's the only problem. You can't tell us right now what it may entail.
Well, I think it's good to have, and Austin can address this, but I think it's good to have some basic parameters in the code, and then do variances depending on the case by case situation. That's typically how you do things. Austin, any comments?
I agree with you completely.
This is Nate. I think, the number one the first, the setback issue, I think that makes sense for a freestanding one completely, but if it's on a roof, it doesn't really make sense because the structure that you're putting on the roof is only 2 or 3 feet tall. And if
Right.
it falls off the roof, it's not a, 20-foot tall pole that's gonna,
Right.
potentially damage the neighbor's house. So I think maybe if there's a way to,
Well,
to,
that's where the next paragraph comes in, if it's mounted on a primary or accessory structure.
Yeah.
right,
So I like how it's laid out.
okay,
But I think it makes sense to make it conditional,
Mhm.
instead of accessory.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
so
they-
Nate,
That's
Yeah.
a good idea. Yeah.
Nate, just to clarify really quickly.
oh, yeah,
that-
that makes sense. I wasn't reading that number 2, sorry.
Yeah, you're good. So the first standard actually does just to apply to ground mounted
Oh, okay,
rather
yeah, I
than
was,
building mounted.
sorry, I totally
No, you're
So-
totally good.
missed.
So
all that.
again, it should be okay, roof mounted. Completely
Yep.
different than something
Yeah.
that's, okay.
Yeah, that's totally right. We anticipate both the ground mounted and roof mounted, and we tailor the standards depending on which one it is, but it falls under the same use. And it sounds like the commission tonight will make a recommendation to move this from a permitted by right accessory use to a conditional use.
That would take
Thank you for your time, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
As long as you don't put a 20-footer on your roof, Nick.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. I'll try not to.
Nick, do you have anything else?
I do not, ma'am. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Lamar.
Do we have any other public comments, questions? Carolyn, anybody?
Trustee Guthrie's in the room. Did you have any public comment?
I don't have it in front of me, but there was that discussion about like artificial stone on, is that in the business district in particular, or what does that apply to?
Yes, we discussed
only
that
the-
earlier this evening. This is in the business overlay district. And it is a total choice that someone would make to make their property in that overlay district. We wrote it like that because that conforms to the comprehensive plan. Currently, there's not that district. There may never be that district. It will happen if a property owner chooses to make their property in that district. And then they're choosing to qualify with all those things. So this will never be forced on any.
So it doesn't exist. So this situation does not exist at this time.
Correct.
And I just want to point out that the comprehensive plan is a guide and not a mandate. So it's not like this has to be written in.
We
Thank
understand,
you.
but we also want to listen to the voices of all the people, all the citizens. And we know it's not a mandate, but it will never be a mandate that people build things in a certain way with certain faux brick or not faux brick or blah, blah, blah. So none of that is a mandate. It is simply making a provision for something that people, our citizens, asked for in the comprehensive plan, and we want to respect that, we want to honor that, and we want to hear that in this process.
Mhm.
I still think it's unnecessary and sort of similar to the whole idea of technology evolving. I think, when it comes to structures and architecture and materials, that evolves as well. And I don't know why we would, restrict things in such a way unnecessarily. And I'm thinking of like the blocks that were used to reinforce Gazebo Island. They they work. And I just don't know. This sounds really cosmetic and unnecessary to me. Thanks.
Well, again, I
I
want to be
agree with you.
really, really clear that this will never be forced on anyone. It would only be the choice of the landowner to apply for this, to ask for this, and to comply with it. Never will anyone be forced to do it. And I don't know if you can say it any plainer than I'm saying it.
I would say, Lamar, though, that her small point there, if you've restricted, they can, it's their choice to apply, but then they'd have to not use the artificial thing.
But that's
And
their
she has
choice.
it. Maybe that isn't just take that little thing out.
That's their choice. That's their choice. And
But
if
you're restricting.
not to do it, they wouldn't apply for it. This is a moot point, but go ahead, Austin, see if you can help explain
Why,
better than I know.
why is it so distasteful to have artificial stone?
So I
Who
think,
thought that up?
I think you did a great job, Lamar. I don't know if I would really add anything other than we looked at all of the comments received during the comprehensive plan process. A big comment that we saw and how it got illustrated in the comprehensive plan is that they liked the look of certain buildings that were designed a certain way with certain materials. And so that ended up in the comprehensive plan as a goal for certain areas, the downtown village area. And then we took that comprehensive plan goal and made it an option. It's just an option. And if you decide to do this higher level of design that matches some of the comments we heard during the comprehensive plan update process, then you can, and you get some benefits for doing that, like a reduction in parking and stuff like that. So the idea is that it brings down the cost in some ways in exchange for meeting this comprehensive plan goal of certain kinds of higher levels design. But of course, like this isn't a needed thing. If it causes more heart pain than anything, you can take the whole district out and just not have it as an option.
And the trustees have the final decision anyway. You have to look at it again.
That's
Mhm.
correct. It's simply our recommendation.
Yeah.
Trustees, any more comment on this?
Other than the fact that, yes, Nate is right. We do have a whole laundry list of other code updates that we need to do. And I've taken down 2 more tonight, so.
Commissioners, anybody else? Relating to that topic? All right, do we have any more public comments?
Not seeing any hands raised or anything on Zoom. The only person I guess that hasn't spoken is Carolyn, if she, last chance for public comment.
With that, we will end the public hearing portion of this meeting and go to
7:53.
C, our resolution PC 2022-01. Maybe some of you were I was taking notes, maybe some of you were as well, and are prepared to do a motion. Or I can do it either way. Anybody?
I can try, Lamar.
Okay,
So I move to approve the resolution as written with the minor changes already submitted and the following policy changes. The wind energy becomes conditional use. We add the applicability on the downtown village overlay, and table 4.2 parking for B&Bs is in line, changes to what's written for short-term rentals.
bed and breakfast is the, yeah, right, yeah. All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have 2 seconds. All in favor, aye.
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 Um,
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. So Austin, we will expect to see this draft that will be sent to BOT. We will see that by the 9th. That will be posted for the meeting on the 13th of the BOT.
Except,
We plan to do a presentation there as well, correct, Austin?
Yes, ma'am. And I'll get you all that material as soon as I have it. It's probably before then.
Okay, great. That way it'll give us a chance to proof it, and in
Mhm.
case we do have a situation where there was an understanding.
Okay.
if we've
Right.
already approved it, we can't change it, can
Well, we discussed that earlier this evening, Anne,
we?
and
Yeah.
made provisions for that possibility.
What'd you say?
We discussed that earlier this evening, and we made provisions for that possibility. We don't expect it, but
Oh, I see.
yeah,
I thought this was it.
well, it
So-
is, but you know.
In case there's some oversight or something.
We don't,
We're not having a meeting though, right?
don't plan on it. We could always call one, but, so is there any other business we need to discuss this evening?
I do have a question for Austin. This is Nate. So assuming this all is approved, there's going to be a rezoning of the entire town. So Austin, is that something that I can't remember to what extent we've spoken to you about this and whether or not you're able to help us through that process?
Yeah, I'm happy to help you through that process. And the draft also anticipates this. So if you look at the footnotes to the district section, it will tell you how the districts will line up. And basically, you'll just recolor code your map and align with that. And then you've already given notice of that as a part of this process. So yeah, why don't we talk offline, Nate, about how that works procedurally? But the steps are kind of already in motion for that to happen.
Okay, thanks. I didn't think about this being a part of that public notice for that, but I know there's specific
Mhm.
meetings and additional hearings that will have to probably take place. So, okay, we can talk more offline. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We appreciate you, Austin. You've been great to work with. We really appreciate everything. And I want to extend my thanks to the planning commissioners who have really worked hard on this and put a lot of time and effort and thought and consideration for the best good of the town. And I really appreciate that. Thank you all.
So Lamar, just, I want to say thank you for your leadership and guiding the process and working with the attorney, us, town staff. So appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, do you have a grandchild?
I have a grandson. Unfortunately, we're really struggling. We would ask for prayers.
Oh, my.
As he was born Wednesday with deprivation of oxygen in the birth process. And
Uh-oh.
it's a very sick little guy in ICU here in Houston. So
Oh, well, we'll
appreciate-
pray.
yeah, I appreciate your thoughts and prayers on that because it's been a real struggle.
Oh, yes.
And David and I have had the 2-year-old and just barely 5-year-old the entire time. So
Oh, you got a lot to do.
yeah, it's been tough. All right. Thank you. You have a good evening and a good rest of your week.
Oh.
Thank you.
bye.
You too.
Thank you.
Adjourning at
Thanks.
7:59.